The night was too quiet for what was coming. 6 torches moved across the dark valley, small flames riding steadily toward the failing ranch. Hooves struck the hard earth in measured rhythm. Wind carried the sharp smell of burning pitch and dry tinder waiting to catch. On the porch, a tall woman stood motionless, shotgun cradled across her arms. She did not call out. She did not move. The distant firelight touched her face and showed nothing but patience worn thin. A voice rose from the dark, soft and righteous. "We've come in Christian concern." The torch left the rider's hand in a long, bright arc. It struck the corner of the livestock barn with a dull thud that turned into a roar. Flames raced up the weathered boards, as if they had been hungry for years. Horses screamed inside. Wind shifted. A spark leapt toward the neighbor's storage shed. From the house, a man ran straight into the fire. No hesitation, no word. She reached after him. The smoke took him whole. The dust never really settled in Redstone Crossing. It just moved around. Swirled up when a wagon rolled through. Coated the back of your throat when the wind came down from the mountains. Settled on your shoulders like something that had given up, trying to go anywhere else. It was that kind of town in Redstone Crossing. As in most of the territory, people came in different sizes. Most were ordinary, some were not. The giants had been part of this valley longer than the town had. Longer than the roads, longer than the general store and the saloon, and the sheriff's office with its crooked weather vane. They had come when the valley was just valley, sage and cedar, and the cold clear creek that ran hard in spring and went quiet by July. Mara Voss was the last of 3 giant families who had settled here. The Aldrids had moved north after their second winter. The Canes had sold their land 6 years back and gone west toward the coast, which left Mara alone on the western edge of the valley, the last giant in Redstone Crossing, which was a fact she had made peace with the same way she had made peace with the east-leaning house and the failing fence posts and the 3 winters without Thomas, 1 day at a time, sometimes 1 hour at a time, sometimes just 1 breath, the kind where everyone knew your name and your business and your grandmother's business, and somehow also the amount of flour you bought last Tuesday and what that probably meant about you as a person. Mara Voss had lived here for 9 years. She knew exactly what kind of town it was. She still came to market day anyway, because the chickens needed feed, because the pump needed a new washer, because a widow, with a failing ranch and exactly $70 left to her name, did not have the luxury of avoiding inconvenient places. Inconvenient places were where the feed and the washers and the $70 all had to go, and so she went. She pulled her wagon through the north end of the square. On the second Tuesday of September, the morning was already warm. The mountains to the west caught the early light and held it, gold and specific, the way they did in the hour before the heat of the day took over. Mara's horse, old gray Bess, who had opinions about every surface she was asked to walk on, picked her way through the wagon ruts with the careful displeasure of a creature who had been doing this for 12 years and felt it should count for something. Mara let her take her time. She was in no hurry. Or she told herself she was in no hurry, which was what she always told herself on market days, because hurry implied wanting something, and wanting things had become complicated in the years since Thomas died. Easier to move through the world at a moderate pace, efficient, purposeful, not invested in outcomes. She was pulling through the north end of the square when she heard it, the crowd. Not the usual market day noise. Not the haggling and the laughing and the children shrieking over nothing. This was different. This was the sound of a crowd that had gathered around something they wanted to see, something that made them feel, for just a few minutes, a little bigger than they actually were. Mara did not slow down. She told herself she did not slow down, except her hands tightened on the reins. And Bess stopped, not because Mara pulled, but because Bess had always been better at reading Mara than Mara was at reading herself. And Mara was already standing up on the wagon seat, shading her eyes against the September sun, looking toward the square before she had consciously decided to do any of those things. What she saw stopped the breath in her chest. A man on the auction block outside the sheriff's office. wrists bound in iron chains that had rusted dark, the kind of rust that comes from weeks of skin and sweat pressed against iron. Ankles shackled with a bar between them that forced his stride into something shuffling and small, the walk of a man whose dignity was being reduced by degrees. He was not shuffling now. He was standing straight. Still. Like he had decided somewhere along the line that they could put chains on his wrists, but they could not put them on his spine. The sun hit him full in the face, and he did not squint against it. His hair was dark, long, tied back with a strip of leather. His jaw was set. His eyes were scanning the crowd with a kind of quiet, cold attention that made the people he looked at way. They would not meet his eyes, and there were a lot of them. Maybe 40 people pressed around that block. Men in work shirts and suspenders, women with market baskets on their arms, children who should have been told to look somewhere else but weren't. The whole town, or most of it, drawn to this the way flies were drawn to something sweet and rotten at the same time. Sheriff Aldous Briggs stood beside the block with his thumbs in his belt loops. He was a man who had learned to be comfortable anywhere, or at least to look it. He had the face of someone who had made a decision long ago that his job was to manage situations, not to judge them, and who had found that this particular philosophy required very little adjustment, depending on what the situation actually was. "Step up, folks," Briggs called out. His voice carried the particular energy of a man who had convinced himself this was just another transaction. Normal, routine, the kind of thing that happened and then was over and everyone went home. Got ourselves a genuine mountain man here. Caught him taking livestock from the Donner operation up north. Judge says he's to be sold to cover the damages. A ripple went through the crowd. Mountain man. That was what they called them. The ones who lived up in the country, who trapped and hunted, and built their lives outside the reach of town and law, and the particular kind of judgments that came with both, who crossed land that had been open range for 100 years before someone put a fence through it, who knew things about survival. That town people had traded for convenience a generation back. Some towns respected them. Some towns tolerated them. Redstone Crossing was not that kind of town either. "Wild animal is what he is," someone said. Male voice. Smug. The voice of a man who had never been tested and had confused that with being strong. "Look at the size of him," a woman said. Not with fear. With something worse than fear. With the tone of someone observing something in a cage at a traveling exhibition. "Mountain beast," a boy called out. Maybe 12 years old. Trying on the words the men around him used, wearing them the way a child wears an adult's hat. Too big. Not yet earned. The man on the block did not react. Not to any of it. He just kept scanning the crowd. Methodical. Patient. Like he was looking for something specific and had not found it yet. Or like he had found what he was looking for a long time ago and discovered it wasn't here and had adjusted accordingly. "Bidding starts at $50, Briggs announced. "Strong back. Good with animals, obviously. Put him to work, and you'll have your money's worth by spring." Mara's hands were still tight on the reins. She was watching the man's face. She could see it clearly from here. She was tall enough, even sitting, to see over the heads of most of the crowd. That was the thing about being the size she was. You saw things other people missed. You saw the whole picture when everyone else was too close to it. A useful gift, sometimes an unwanted one. What she saw was this: a man who was not afraid, not the performed kind of not afraid. Not someone gritting their teeth and hiding it behind a blank expression. This was something else, something quieter. He was not afraid the way a stone is not afraid of rain. The rain comes. The stone is still there afterward. The man on the block had made his peace with whatever was happening to him, and he was simply waiting for it to end. Waiting the way you waited for weather, with patience that had nothing to do with hope, that was almost worse than fear. She was going to drive on. She was absolutely going to drive on. She had chickens to feed and a pump to fix and $70 that needed to stretch into something that resembled a functioning life. She had a list in her coat pocket, a real list written in pencil on folded paper, and not a single item on it was optional. She had planned this trip with the precision of someone who understood that a dollar misspent Now was a meal missed. In February, do I hear 50? Briggs called. A hand went up near the front. Tom Colker from the mine operation. He was a man who bought things the way other men breathed, regularly, without much thought. He was looking at the man on the block the way he looked at timber, measuring board feet and labor hours, and return on investment. Mara thought about Thomas. That was the problem with grief. It came sideways. It did not announce itself or make appointments. She was looking at a man in chains being sold like timber, and suddenly, she was thinking about Thomas, who had died in their bed 3 winters ago, with her hand in his, who had been fine on a Thursday and gone by Sunday, who had held her hand even at the end, and told her she was the strongest person he had ever known. And what he would say if he were standing next to her right now. She knew exactly what he would say. She did not want to hear it, but she heard it anyway, clear as a bell. In his particular voice, which had been low and amused and always slightly warmer than the situation required, her boot hit the wagon's footboard. She was already swinging down before the thought finished forming. The ground was a long way down for most people. For Mara, it was just the ground. She landed, and the earth felt it, a small percussion, a settling, and several people nearby turned at the sound. She walked toward the block. The crowd parted, not out of kindness. Out of the practical mathematics of a woman who was nearly twice the height of everyone around her moving in a direction with intent. You did not stand between Mara Voss and where she was going, unless you wanted to experience the inconvenience of that decision, and in 9 years the people of Redstone Crossing had learned this clearly enough that it required no relearning. She stopped at the edge of the block, up close. She could see the marks the chains had left on the man's wrists. Weeks of wearing, red and raw and grooved in places where the iron had found the same spot again and again. The kind of marks that did not come from a day or two of custody. The kind that came from someone who had decided the chains should hurt. Who had looked at a man and chosen the heaviest iron available. Something in her jaw tightened. Don't touch him. Her voice was not loud. She did not need loud. The words came out at a frequency that cut through everything else, through the shuffling feet and the murmured commentary and Briggs' mid-sentence. Conversation stopped. The shuffling feet stopped. Briggs stopped. She looked up at the man on the block. He was looking back at her. This close, she could see his eyes properly. Dark brown. Steady. There was a flicker of something in them when he looked at her. Not fear, not the stunned gaping she usually got from people seeing her for the first time. Something more like recognition. Like he was recalibrating. Like he had been prepared for various things and was now encountered by something that required a new category. She looked at Briggs. I'll buy him, she said. Every coin I have. The silence was so complete she could hear the flies working the vegetable stalls 20 feet away. Then it all broke at once. Clara, I mean Mrs. Voss, have you lost your mind completely? You can't bring that creature onto your property. This is insane, woman. A mountain man. Mara, do you understand what mountain men? She was already opening the worn leather purse at her hip, counting. She knew exactly how much was in there because she had counted it 4 times this week, each time hoping the mathematics might produce a different answer. It never did. $70. All of it in coins because she did not trust paper money to feel as real in her hand as it needed to feel when it was everything she had. She held the cloth bundle out to Briggs. The coins clinked softly against each other. $70, she said. Bill of sale now. Briggs looked at the money, looked at her, looked at the money again. His face was doing several things at once, none of them comfortable. He was a man who disliked scenes, who liked things to be simple and finished quickly so everyone could go home. He was also a man who had learned, a long time ago, that when Mara Voss set her jaw a certain way, the most efficient path forward was compliance. Arguing with Mara Voss when she had decided something was like arguing with weather. He reached for the bundle, from the far left of the crowd. Near the edge of the livery where the light was thin, and the shadows gave a man room to stand, without being particularly noticed, a figure watched Harlan cross. He was 62 years old, and had spent 40 of those years learning that the most effective way to acquire something was to arrange for other people to not want it anymore. He never bid on anything publicly. Public bidding was for men who had not yet learned to be patient. He was watching Briggs count the coins, watching Mara stand straight and unmovable while the crowd murmured around her. Watching the man on the block watch Mara with those quiet, careful eyes, Cross nodded to himself very slightly and allowed the thinnest edge of a smile. She had just spent everything she had. In 8 weeks, the debt on the Voss property would come due. And Mara Voss, who had just handed over her last dollar to buy a stranger's freedom, would have nothing left to pay it with. He had been patient for 5 months. He could be patient for 8 more weeks. He turned and walked away before the transaction was complete. The bill of sale was written in Briggs's careful, small handwriting and stamped with more force than was strictly necessary. The stamp of a man expressing displeasure in the only channel available to him. He handed the paper to Mara without looking at her. The paper was still warm from his hand. She folded it and put it in her coat, inside pocket, where she kept things that mattered. The chains, she said. Briggs produced the key from his vest pocket. He unlocked the ankle bar first. It came off with a grinding protest, and then a sound like a small final argument being concluded, then hesitated at the wrists. He glanced at the man, then at Mara. The look of a man performing one last ritual check on a decision that had already been made and could not be unmade, but that he was going to check anyway, because checking preserved something, even if he could not have said what. Once I take these off, then he'll be a free man, Mara said, which is what I just paid for. The key turned in the lock. The wrist chains fell. Hit the wooden platform with a sound that carried across the square. Not loud, but clear in the sudden quiet that had settled over the crowd. A sound like something ending. Like a particular wrong being corrected, however partially, however belatedly. The crowd heard it and said nothing, which was its own kind of eloquence. The man stood very still for a moment, just breathing, not moving, just existing in the new fact of his own unchained wrists, looking at them, at the marks there, deep and angry, carved in by weeks of iron, the skin broken in places, crusted over, the bruising running deep in the tissue. They would take time to heal. Longer than the marks would be visible. That was how those injuries worked. The visible part healed first. The rest took longer. He rubbed the left wrist slowly, once, with his right thumb. A careful private gesture. Something entirely his own. The first entirely human thing she had seen him do, in a morning full of people doing their best to make him less than human. Then he looked at her. She looked back. I'm Mara Voss, she said. I have a ranch about an hour's ride west. I have work, and I have a roof, and I have nothing else to offer you. She thought about adding more, about how she placed no obligation on the purchase, about how he was free to walk in any direction, and she did not say any of it. He was standing right in front of her, and she could see from the quality of his attention that he understood all of that already without being told. But you're not in chains anymore. A pause. Can you ride? Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Something adjacent to one. Something that had been in storage for a while and came out slightly stiff from the long keeping, like a door that has been closed too long and requires a moment before it opens freely again. He nodded once. Clear, unhesitant. Good, she said. The livery's this way. She turned and walked behind her. The crowd drew back the way crowds did when the spectacle was over, and the ordinary businesses of the day was waiting to be attended to. The unusual thing had happened and would now be discussed at length in every parlor and saloon in Redstone Crossing. Now there was produce to buy and gossip to disseminate and children to locate who had wandered off during the excitement. Around her, the afternoon sounds resumed, cautious at first, then fuller, like a conversation picking back up after an interruption that had required everyone to recalibrate what's before or after. She did not look at any of them. She did not look at any of them, did not search their faces for approval or censure. The decision was made, and behind her now, folded into the inside pocket of her coat along with the bill of sale, and looking at faces was not going to change it or improve it or make it easier to live with. She did not turn around to check if he was following. She knew he was. She could feel it. The particular weight of a second set of footsteps on the hard-packed earth of the square. The way the air shifted when someone was walking behind you with purpose rather than drifting. Not following because he had to. Following because he had chosen to. And the distinction between those two things was everything. Was the whole point. Was what $70 had actually purchased. She had not felt the weight of another person's purposeful footsteps behind her in 3 years. It felt like something she had not known she was missing until it was returned to her. His name was Cade Flint. He told her on the ride west when she asked. Not immediately. There was a pause first. The kind of pause that comes when someone has not been addressed as a person for long enough that the question feels unfamiliar. When being asked your name feels like being offered something and you have to remember how to take it. How to accept it without checking first. To see if there are conditions attached. Cade, he said. Then, after a beat, Cade Flint, she nodded. Mara Voss, you said. I suppose I did. That was the extent of the conversation for the next 20 minutes, and it should have been uncomfortable. Sitting on the wagon seat, beside a man she had purchased this morning with the last of her money, in the middle of a public square, while 40 people watched. And judged, and formed opinions they would share extensively over the coming weeks. And it was not uncomfortable at all. Mara had spent 3 years in her own company. She had grown accustomed to silence that had texture and weight, and did not necessarily need to be filled. Some silences were empty, some were full. This one was the second kind. Cade rode beside her on the livery horse she had arranged, a solid bay gelding who seemed to be reserving judgment about the whole arrangement, with the ease of a man who had made peace with the same thing, with silence. With the particular freedom of not being required to fill it, she watched him from the corner of her eye. He was taking in the landscape, not the way a stranger does, cataloging what is unfamiliar and filing it away. The way someone does who has spent a long time in open country and knows how to read it. His eyes moved across the ridgeline to the north, measured it, not the height, but what the height meant. The snow line that would come in November, the passes that would close. His gaze traced the dry creek bed that cut through the lower pasture, understood what it meant about water and the months ahead. Noted the angle of the afternoon sun and what it said about the time and the season and how much daylight remained. He was reading the land the way she read faces, for information, for truth, for what was being communicated beneath what was visible on the surface. He was not a man who looked at things without thinking about them. You didn't take any livestock, she said. It was not a question. She had understood this from the moment he said Cross's name, even before she had fully assembled the understanding into something she could articulate. The pieces had begun arranging themselves the way pieces did when you were finally looking at them from the right angle. He did not answer immediately. The hooves of both horses found a comfortable rhythm. On the hard-packed road, a sound like something being agreed upon without discussion. No, he said. The Donner operation. You were on their land. A pause. Long enough to be considered rather than avoided. Passing through. Crossing point I've used for 12 years. Open range before. They put a fence up 6 months ago. I went through the fence because I didn't know it was there. Came down from the north ridge, not the usual approach. Their foreman found me on the other side with a horse nearby. He looked at her. His eyes were direct. No performance in them. No attempt to appear innocent. Just the flat, patient truth of someone who has already been through the process of not being believed and has decided to say what happened regardless. Their horse had gotten out because they built a bad fence. The animal followed me through the gap. I got arrested for the theft, and no one asked questions. No one wanted answers. She sat with that for a while, the specific weight of it, the way systems that were supposed to find truth instead found whatever was most convenient, whatever allowed the most people to go home having done the least possible amount of difficult thinking. She had watched that happen before, in smaller ways, over smaller stakes. It was worse when the stakes were a man's freedom. The road curved south and the ranch came into sight in the distance, still too far to make out the details, which was probably a mercy. She needed a moment to compose herself before she had to look at it again, through someone else's eyes, and see it as it actually was, rather than as she had trained herself to see it, as a project rather than a failure, as something becoming rather than something falling apart. "Who's behind it?" she asked. "Man named Cross." She felt something go tight and cold in her chest. Not surprise, something more specific than surprise. The particular sensation of a suspicion you have been carrying for a long time, being confirmed by someone who has no reason to tell you anything but the truth. No investment in your reaction. No interest in what you do with the information. Just, here is what I know. Here is what happened. Take it or leave it. She did not let it show on her face. "Harlan Cross," she said. "You know him, I know him." She did not say anything else about that. Not yet. There was a particular kind of knowing that took time to arrive at, and she had arrived at it slowly, over the course of 3 years, accumulating small pieces of evidence the way you accumulated burrs on a wool coat walking through a September field, one at a time, each one not much on its own. But enough of them, and suddenly you couldn't move without feeling them, couldn't go anywhere without carrying them with you. She had been thinking about Harlan Cross for a long time, had wondered if the thinking was fair, had given him the benefit of every doubt she could manufacture, because she understood that grief and isolation and 3 years of struggling alone could make a person see enemies where there were only ordinary inconveniences. Now she was less sure she was wrong to think what she had been thinking. The valley opened out before them. The afternoon light went long and gold across the sage flats. The mountains to the west held the last of the direct sun, purple and sharp-edged against the sky. In the high country somewhere, in the places Kate Flint had spent 7 years learning, the first frosts would have come already. The high meadows would have gone brown. The water sources he knew by heart would be running cold and clear. The way they ran before the cold locked them entirely. She wondered, briefly, what it cost a man like that to come down. She wondered if he would stay. Then she stopped wondering about it and drove the wagon around the last curve and let the ranch come up to meet them. In all its failing and its stubbornness and its collection of things that needed doing, the ranch arrived, meaning they crested the final rise, and there it was, spread out below them in the golden and unforgiving light of a September afternoon. And there was nothing left to do but look at it. Mara looked at it. She had been looking at it for 3 years. Every morning when she walked out to feed the chickens, and every evening when she walked back inside to eat alone. In the early hours when she couldn't sleep, and went out to sit on the porch steps with her knees pulled up and her arms around them, like she could hold herself together by force of will. She knew every sag and gap and weathered board of it. She knew exactly how bad it was. It was bad. The main house leaned slightly to the east, the way an old man leans when his back has given up arguing with gravity. The front fence had lost half its posts to time and entropy, leaving gaps wide enough to drive the wagon through. The barn had a roof that was more patched than original material, layers of tin and tar paper accumulating like scar tissue over a wound that kept reopening. The kitchen garden, which had once been Thomas's particular pride. He had loved that garden with the specific devotion of a man who had grown up without enough food and never forgot it, had gone to weeds and hard earth. She had been fighting it all alone. Every repair she made, 2 more things broke. It was the arithmetic of defeat, slow and relentless, and she had been losing it for 36 months. She heard Cade shift in his saddle beside her. She waited for the judgment. Everyone who saw the ranch judged it. Some did it kindly. Some did it the way Dale Morrison did, with barely concealed satisfaction at a competitor's difficulty. Some did it with pity, which was almost worse. The judgment did not come. "Good bones," Cade said. She looked at him. He was studying the property with those methodical eyes, moving from the house to the barn to the fence line, reading it the way he had read the landscape on the ride out. Like it was a thing that could be understood if you looked at it long enough and honestly enough. "The house frame is solid," he said. "I can see the vertical from here. Fence posts are the problem, not the rails." That's a different kind of job. Barn roof is fixable. It's been layered rather than replaced, which means someone was solving the immediate problem rather than the real one. But the underlying structure is still there. He looked at her. Land's good, he said. This much sage and cedar together. The soil holds water underneath even in dry months. You've got a working well? The pump needs a new leather washer. That's an afternoon. She looked at the sagging fence and the patched barn and the east-leaning house. Then she looked at his hands on the reins, large hands, calloused in the specific places that came from years of labor with no one to share it. The livestock barn first, she said. Then the fence, he nodded, once, like a man accepting a contract. They rode down to the house together. He did not ask for direction. That was the first thing she noticed. She unsaddled the horses and turned on them into the paddock while he walked directly to the fence line and began examining the posts with the attention of someone who already understood what he was going to find and was confirming it rather than discovering it. By the time she had the saddles stored, he had found the weak points and was already pulling up the worst offender with his bare hands. She brought him water. He drank without stopping work. She brought him tools from the shed. Thomas's tools, hanging in their places as precisely as Thomas had kept everything gathering dust and rust these past 3 years because she had not touched them. She had told herself she was preserving them, keeping them ready. Now she understood she had been keeping them for someone who knew how to use them. Cade took each tool and turned it in his hands, testing the heft, checking the edge. The way you handled a thing you respected. He set 2 aside. With small faults he couldn't address himself and kept the rest. When he found the whetstone on the bottom shelf, he held it up in a question. Yes, she said. Whatever you need. He set to work sharpening, with the focused calm of someone who understood that preparation was not separate from the job. It was the job. Half the work was done or lost in the 10 minutes before the work started. Thomas used to say that she went back to the house before she could say so out loud. She made beans and cornbread. Simple and quick. The kind of meal you made when you had not been expecting company, or when you had, because it was all there was. She carried the tray out to the barn at dusk, when the light went gold and low and the shadows stretched long across the yard. She found him sitting on a hay bale in the low lantern light, doing something with a piece of leather harness that had been cracked and useless for 2 full seasons. She had looked at it many times and thought about fixing it and never had, because fixing it implied a future that included horses and work, and the particular kind of permanence she had been struggling to believe in. He was mending it, carefully, with a bone needle and thread she did not know was in the bottom drawer of the tool chest because she had never opened the bottom drawer. She stopped in the doorway. He looked up. She came in and set the tray on the nearest flat surface. The barn cats materialized from the shadows, as barn cats always did at dusk and at the smell of food, 3 of them, in varying states of grizzled indifference to human affairs. The old gray tabby, who had never liked Thomas and had never warmed to Mara either, walked directly to Cade and pressed its head against his shin, with the casual authority of an animal making a decision. He reached down and scratched behind its ear without looking away from the harness. Mara sat on an overturned bucket. They ate. The barn around them creaked and settled in the evening cooling, making the sounds old structures made when they were releasing the heat of the day, adjusting, settling back into themselves. An owl started up in the oak stand to the north. The horses shifted and blew softly in their stalls. It was the most normal evening she had spent in 3 years. She did not know what to do with that. So she just sat with it. Let it be what it was, without pulling at it or examining it too closely, the way you left bread dough alone after you'd done what you could do. When they were done, Cade looked at the tray, then at her. "Thank you," he said. Low, careful. Like the words had been in storage for a while and needed handling gently. Needed to be carried out into the air slowly so they didn't break. She nodded. Started to stand. Mara. She stopped. He was looking at the photograph on the shelf above the workbench. She had not noticed it there. Thomas had put it up years ago, And she had stopped seeing it, the way you stopped, seeing things that had always been present. A small picture of the two of them on the day the deed transferred, the day the ranch officially became theirs. Thomas grinning like an idiot, which was the only way he knew how to grin, at full volume. Mara beside him, taller by 1.5 feet, trying not to grin and failing completely. "Your husband," Cade said. "Not a question, Thomas Voss," she said. "He died 3 winters ago. Fever. 3 days from fine to gone." Cade was quiet for a moment. He looked at the photograph with the attention he gave to everything. Thorough, unhurried, real. "He built this place with you," he said. "We built it together," she said. "That was the plan." He nodded once. Slowly. Like he was putting that information somewhere specific, somewhere it would be useful. She went back to the house. She stood in the kitchen for several minutes, doing nothing in particular. One hand pressed flat against the table, listening to the unfamiliar sound of someone else in her barn. Small sounds, movement. The creak of wood settling under a different weight. The particular quality of an evening that held more than one person's presence, not alone. She had not known how loud alone sounded until it stopped. 2 weeks, the fence along the south pasture stood straight for the first time in 2 years. Every post, plumb and solid in the way of things built to last, rather than built to get through the winter. The barn door opened and closed without that resigned sideways drag it had been doing since the hinge gave way. The pump delivered clean, steady water on day 4, when Cade replaced the leather washer and 3 other failing components she had not known were failing. The garden came back. That surprised her most. She had kept it going out of stubbornness, pulling weeds, harvesting what she could, replanting in spring. But it had been a survival garden, a barely garden, a garden that existed because she refused to let it not exist. Now it was actually a garden, tended by someone who understood drainage and root systems and the relationship between shade and yield. They fell into a partnership without discussing it. No announcements, no division of labor formally agreed upon, no asking for credit. The job needed doing. The job got done. The next job presented itself, and they went to it. Thomas had talked while he worked, running commentary on everything: the weather, the soil, the neighbor's fence line, what he thought the county was going to do about the road maintenance, and what he thought about that, which was always a lot. Thomas had opinions about everything, and shared them generously, and she had loved that about him even when it drove her slightly to distraction. Cade was quiet, the way mountains were quiet, not empty, not absent, just still. And in that stillness she became more aware of things she had stopped noticing. The sound of the wind finding the gap in the barn siding. The specific way a hawk carved a thermal over the south ridge. The quality of the light at 4 in the afternoon. It went gold and long, and everything it touched looked briefly like it was made of something valuable. On the 14th day, she was clearing the old desk in the corner of the bedroom, Thomas's desk. She had been avoiding it. There was something final about clearing it, like agreeing that he was not coming back to find his papers in disarray and spend an evening reorganizing them with the particular brand of cheerful frustration that had been entirely his. She had been treating the desk like a held breath, like something she would get to eventually. She got to it on the 14th day because she had run out of other things to avoid. The drawer stuck. She worked it free. The papers inside were the usual accumulation: receipts, letters, seed catalogs, 2 seasons out of date. A drawing she had made in their first summer here of the ranch, as she imagined it would look when finished. She had been optimistic in that drawing. She had drawn a 2nd floor on the house. She looked at it for a moment, then set it aside under all of it, at the very bottom, pressed flat against the drawer wood, as if it wanted to go unnoticed. A folded paper, heavier than the rest. Official paper, the kind used for legal documents. She unfolded it. Write it again. The words did not change between readings, which was what she had been hoping for, and what she had known would not happen. An agreement. Dated 8 months ago, 2 months before Thomas died. Signed Thomas Voss and Harlan Cross. Witnessed by a notary whose name she did not recognize. The terms were written in the clean, impersonal language of legal documents, which somehow made them worse. If the outstanding debt on the Voss property, $300, listed with compound interest to the penny, was not repaid within 6 months of Thomas Voss's death, the property would transfer to Harlan Cross at the agreed valuation. Thomas Voss had died 5 months ago. She had 8 weeks. Her hands were shaking. She noticed this from a distance, the way you noticed things, when your mind was working very hard to stay calm, and had allocated all its resources to that task, leaving nothing over for incidentals like the behavior of your hands. The paper trembled between her fingers. She put it down on the desk and pressed her palms flat against the surface. $300. She had had 70. She had spent 70. She had nothing. She heard the back door open. Footsteps in the kitchen. Then silence, the quality of silence that meant someone had entered a room and understood that something had changed. Then Cade appeared in the bedroom doorway, reading the quality of the air the way he read everything else. Knowing something had shifted before he could have known what it was. He looked at her, then at the paper on the desk. He crossed to the desk and picked it up. Read it. His face did not change, but something in his stillness changed. A different quality to it, the stillness of a man processing something he had already suspected. Your husband, he said, slow. Careful. Was he the kind of man who'd sign something like this? She looked at him. She thought about Thomas, who had fought Cross in court 2 years before his death over the Eastern water rights, and won, fairly and cleanly, because he was meticulous and honest and had the documentation to prove every claim. Who had never borrowed money from anyone he did not trust completely. Who had spoken Cross's name in the last year of his life with a particular flatness that she recognized now, as the tone of a man who was watching something and waiting to understand what it meant before he moved. No, she said. He was not. Cade set the paper down. Then someone wants you to believe he did. The words landed. Simple and heavy. She had been working up to that thought for 3 minutes, and he had just put it on the desk next to the paper and let it sit there. Cross, she said. Cade did not answer. But he did not look surprised. She folded the paper and put it in her coat pocket. 8 weeks. $300. A forged signature. A man who owned half the valley and the legal goodwill of most of the county. We need to know why, she said. Not just that he wants the land. Why this land? Why the trouble of forging a document and waiting? He's patient, Cade said. Men like that don't wait 5 months without a reason. There's something here, she said. Something Thomas knew or found. She looked at him. I'll find it, he said. And the simplicity of it, the certainty, the lack of qualification, she did not doubt him. Day 15 came on a Tuesday. Mara was in the kitchen garden when she heard the horses. 3 of them she had learned in the last 2 weeks to count hoofbeats without thinking about it, to know without looking how many animals were approaching, and at what pace and from which direction. 3 horses, coming from the East Road at a deliberate walk. The pace of people who were not in a hurry because they did not need to be. The pace of certainty. She finished the row she was working. She was not going to be seen to hurry for Harlan Cross, not on her own land, not in her own garden. She set down the hoe, brushed the dirt from her hands and turned. Cross came through the gate like he owned it. Which was the point? Which was always the point with Cross. Every gesture a rehearsal for the thing he intended to make true. Walking through a gate he did not own with the ease of a man, for whom ownership was simply a matter of time and patience. Walking the way a man walked when he believed the only real question about any given property was when it would transfer to him, not whether. 2 men behind him she did not know by name. She knew the type. Men who attached themselves to powerful men and absorbed the power by proximity. Men who had learned that being in the right orbit exempted them from the effort of developing their own character. She had met the type before. They came in behind Cross the way a shadow came in behind a lamp. She walked to the center of the yard and stopped. She did not cross her arms. She did not hold the hoe. She just stood. She was tall enough that standing was its own statement. Mr. Cross, Mara. He dismounted with the ease of a man who had never spent a day physically laboring in his life. Everything about him was maintained, pressed. Each detail of his appearance designed to communicate the same thing. Here is a man of consequence. Here is a man who has resources and the patience to deploy them. I heard about your purchase in town. I imagine you did. I came to check on your welfare. He looked around the yard without hurrying. At the newly upright fence posts, his eyes paused there, just briefly. At the straight barn door. His face did not change, but something in it acknowledged what it was seeing. Some improvements since I was last here, she said nothing. She had learned, over the years, that silence was more useful than most of the things you could fill it with. It made other people talk. It made them reveal what they were actually there for. He looked at the house, back at her. The debt on this property, he said, shifting tone slightly, from casual observation to what passed, with Cross for genuine concern. It's a significant sum, and your circumstances are, he paused, chose his word with the deliberate care of a man who had spent decades choosing words. Reduced. I want to be a good neighbor. I have always wanted to be a good neighbor to you, Mara. I want to offer for you a way out, a fair price, more than fair. You'd have enough to go east, start over somewhere reasonable. A woman alone, a property this size, these problems. The back door of the house opened. Cade stepped out. He came across the yard without hurrying. The hammer from the fence work was in his hand, held at his side the way you held a tool you were using. Easy, functional, not raised, not threatening, simply present. He stopped about 8 feet to Mara's left and a step behind her. He said nothing. He did not need to say anything. One of Cross's men started to move a hand toward his hip. A reflex, or something practiced to look like a reflex. Cross held up 2 fingers without looking at him. The hand stopped. Everything about that exchange was old, practiced, choreographed. They had done it before in other yards, with other people standing in the center of them. Cross looked at Cade for a long moment, not with hostility. That would have been too visible, too readable. With the patient attention of a man filing information away, something moved behind his eyes, a small recalculation. He had expected, perhaps, the mountain man to have left by now, or to be less present than this, or to be a different kind of problem than the one he was looking at. He looked back at Mara. "This is the mountain man," he said, pleasantly. "This is Cade Flint," she said. "He works for me, mountain man," Cross said again, with the tone of a man sharing a well-known fact. "You know what they say about mountain men." "I know what some people say," she said. "I've noticed those same people are frequently wrong about most things." He smiled. The smile that did not reach his eyes, which maintained their particular temperature regardless of what the rest of his face was doing. The temperature of someone who had been calculating for so long that the calculation had replaced the feeling. 8 weeks. "Mara," he said, very gently. "The way you reminded a child of something they had already been told patiently, because children sometimes forgot. I don't want things to get unpleasant. I never want things to get unpleasant. I am a reasonable man. You have known me for 9 years. You know that." She looked at him for a long moment. At the pressed clothes, the maintained appearance. The thin smile that was a costume for something that had no warmth in it. "I know what you are," she said. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Exactly 3. She counted them, later in her memory. Then he turned and remounted with the same unhurried ease. His men followed. At the gate he stopped his horse and looked back over his shoulder, a gesture practiced enough to look spontaneous. "Enjoy what's left of it," he said, and rode away. The sound of hooves faded east on the afternoon wind. The dust they raised drifted across the yard and settled on the fence posts and the garden and the surface of the water trough. Everything Harlan Cross touched, he left a residue on. That was how she thought of him. A residue. The yard went quiet. Mara stood and watched until she could not hear the hooves anymore. Could not hear anything except the ordinary sounds of the ranch and the wind, and the distant call of something in the oak grove. Cade had not moved from his position. Still to her left, still holding the hammer. "He was watching at the auction," she said. "He knew you'd end up there. He arranged it, and he let you buy me because it emptied your purse," Cade said. "Yes." She looked at the gate gap where the latch had rusted off, and she had never replaced it. She should fix that. She added it to the list that lived in the back of her mind, The list that had once been 10 items and was now 47 and would grow to 60 before it began to shrink. He's been planning this for longer than 5 months. Yes, the forged document, the waiting, the arrest. She turned to look at him. All connected. He nodded. Then we need to figure out what he wants badly enough to go to that kind of trouble. She looked back at the road. Because it's not just the land. People don't forge dead men's signatures for grazing rights. Cade was quiet for a moment. He looked at the south pasture. At the creek bed beyond it, dry now, the stones white in the afternoon sun. At the ridge line to the north, where the high country began, he was reading something she could not read from here. There's something here, he said. We just don't know what it is yet. Then we find it. She walked back to the garden. He walked back to the fence, and the ranch, which had been silent and failing for 3 years, continued its slow and stubborn effort to become something again. That night she lay in the dark and listened to the house. The familiar creaks, the wind around the eaves, the sound of the horses in the paddock, settling for the night. Thomas. What did you see? What did you find? What did you not have time to tell me? The answers were somewhere in this house, in this land, in the accumulation of 9 years of a life built piece by 2 people who had believed in something worth building. She would find them. She had 7 weeks and 6 days. Outside in the barn, a lantern glowed through the cracks in the wood, steady and small and constant in the dark. Not alone. The thought settled on her chest like something warm, like a hand placed carefully over the place that hurt. Not alone. Not anymore. Soren Vane came on a Wednesday in the 4th week, with the last of his summer squash, because he had grown too much as usual and someone needed to take it. Soren Vane was 71 years old and had the constitution of a man who had spent 7 decades refusing to be inconvenienced by weather, age, or the opinions of others. His wife Astrid had sent him, which meant the squash was partly an excuse. He looked past Mara at Cade on the barn roof, moving across it with the sure-footedness of a man who spent his life in high places. Good worker, Soren said. He knows what he's doing most places. Soren's face had no room left for pretense. They're talking, he said, more than usual. Reverend Cole gave a sermon Sunday, didn't use names. Talked about the corruption of good Christian households. Used the word contamination. His voice was flat. He did not editorialize. The Harmon brothers were in the front pew. That's new. Cross has been at the saloon, Mara said. Not a question, buying rounds, talking to men who have debts. He handed her a small cloth bundle. Seeds from Astrid, labeled in her careful hand. For spring, he said. Plan for spring. He touched his hat. Keep your shotgun close. He drove away. The conversation on the porch happened 4 days later, a Tuesday evening. Not planned. Those conversations never were. They sat on the porch steps because the evening was still warm enough, and the sky was doing something worth watching. The sun going down behind the western ridge, in a slow bleed of orange and gold and a shade of purple that had no name she knew. Cade spoke first. He did not usually speak first. 7 years, he said. She looked at him, in the high country. Not because I wanted to be alone. He watched the ridge, because I believed in a place once. It didn't hold. He was quiet for a moment. Town called Millhaven, east of here. I had a claim, worked it 3 seasons, had a cabin, knew the people. His voice was even. Reporting geography. Here is where things went wrong. Man came in with money and a lawyer and a document that said my claim had a flaw in the original filing. Judge agreed. I lost the cabin, the claim, the 3 seasons of work. A pause. The friends I thought I had there. They didn't stand with you. They didn't want the trouble. She understood that. Precisely. In the specific place in her chest where things sat when they were too true to argue with. After that, I went up, he said. Stayed up. Figured if the world didn't want me in it. You'd make your own, she said. He looked at her. That's what I did here, she said, after Thomas. My family wanted me to go east. Sell the ranch. Come home and be a proper widow. I couldn't do it. This was our dream. I wasn't going to let it become nothing, just because I was the only one left to keep it alive. So you stayed. I stayed. Same kind of wilderness, he said. She recognized her own words coming back. What she had said on the porch that first week, half to herself. He had been listening. Yes, she said. The sun finished going down. She told him about Thomas going to town 8 months before his death, 2 days, not telling her exactly why. Coming back quieter, watching Cross differently after that, he found something, Cade said, and then found survey stakes 6 weeks before my arrest. About half a mile east of your property line, she stood up. Abruptly, he's not after the land, she said. He's after what's under it. Thomas had always said there was more water under that land than above it. It's been one plan for over a year, she said. I need to find what Thomas found. He stood. Less obvious places. What did Thomas hide when something really mattered? She knew exactly where to look. She found it behind the hearthstone. Third one from the left. The one Thomas had remortared 2 summers ago on a rainy afternoon, telling her the original mortar had crumbled. She had believed him. The mortar was not crumbled at all. He had loosened it on purpose and reset it so precisely that you would have to be looking for the seam to find it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, a small notebook. Thomas's handwriting, the careful, blocky letters she would know anywhere. She sat on the floor in front of the cold fireplace and read it for an hour and a half. Thomas had been thorough. Over the course of his last year, he had found evidence of a significant aquifer running under the eastern valley floor, a water source that would transform dry land into productive land in one of the most water-scarce regions in the territory. Worth a fortune. Worth the patience of a man like Cross, who understood what land was worth not for what it was now, but for what it could become. He had also found the original survey records, improperly filed by Cross's men. Records that would establish the Voss property line extended 200 yards further east than the current official maps showed, putting a significant portion of the aquifer access under Voss land. Thomas had gathered all of it, carefully, over months, and then he had died before he could use it. She knocked on Cade's door. He opened it immediately. She handed him the notebook. He read it, standing in the doorway while she watched his face. He knew, she said. He was building a case, and Cross knew Thomas knew, Cade said, which means Thomas's death. She stopped. The word she did not want to use sat between them. Fever can come from anywhere, Cade said steadily. Yes, she said. They stood in the narrow hallway, with the lamplight between them and the weight of everything Thomas had been trying to do. We need allies, she said, and we need to move before Cross does. She went back to her room, lay down, did not sleep. But she held the notebook against her chest in the dark and felt, for the first time, like she was holding something Thomas had meant to give her. He had not run out of time completely. He had just run out of it before he could hand this over himself. It came on a Thursday night, the 5th week, the sound of horses out of the dark, after 11. When the ranch had been quiet for 2 hours. She was up before she was fully awake. 3 years of being alone did that to a person. Your ears learned to sort sounds. Know which ones belonged and which ones didn't. Torches. She counted from the window. 5, maybe 6. Moving from the direction of town, slow and deliberate. She was at Cade's door before the first one reached the gate. He was already up, already dressed, already at the window. 6, she said. Torches, coal? Probably. Cross won't be there. He's never where the mess gets made. She picked up the shotgun, already loaded. Had been every night since the first week. They went out together. Reverend Silas Cole sat at the front of the group like he was delivering a benediction from horseback. His black coat ate the torchlight around it. His face wore the expression of a man who regretted deeply being forced to do what was obviously the right thing. To his left, Tobias Wren, the youngest by 15 years, sitting on his horse like he was not sure how he had ended up on it, his torch slightly lower than the others. Not looking at Mara. Looking at Cade. Mrs. Voss, Cole said. We've come in Christian concern for your welfare. You've come with torches at 11 o'clock at night, she said. Christian concern usually comes in daylight. This man does not belong here. His name is Cade Flint. He works for me. He has rebuilt more of this ranch in 5 weeks than 3 hired men managed in 3 years. He is here because I asked him to be here. Cross's man moved his horse sideways, getting an angle. Mara saw it. Cade saw it too and shifted. 1 step, just 1. Making it more complicated without making it a confrontation. Mathematical. Precise. Whatever you have been told to do here tonight, she said, slowly. Whatever you were promised. You are standing on my land. You are carrying torches. You are here to frighten me into doing what someone else wants. She looked at each face. I am not frightened. Not entirely true. True enough. Cole opened his mouth. Tobias Wren said, maybe we should go. Quiet. But everyone heard it. I'm saying we should go. He was still looking at Cade. Something had resolved in his face. Something had landed. This isn't right. This isn't what I thought this was. I'm going. He turned his horse, and then it happened. One of the Harmon-type men. His torch came back and forward in an arc, and left his hand in a long, bright, terrible moment, turning end over end in the air, and landed in the dry grass at the corner of the livestock barn. The fire did not build slowly. Dry summer, tinder grass, dry timber. The fire went from torch to grass to wall in the time it took her to exhale. The barn, she shouted, already moving. But Cade was already past her, already running. She saw him go for the horses first, the paddock gate, throwing it open, driving them out with his arms wide, his voice low and firm. The horses wheeling and bolting past him, all out, all clear. Cole and most of the others went into the dark immediately. Fire had a way of clarifying situations. You started it, you owned it, and Cole did not want to own this. Tobias Wren had not run. He was at the water trough beside her, using his hat as a container. A terrible idea executed with complete conviction. There was not going to be enough water. She knew that, and in the back of her mind she was already calculating the wind direction and… Soren. Soren's property was 200 yards north. Soren and Astrid's granddaughter was staying with them, 5 years old. She turned north and her blood went cold. The wind had carried a spark. The corner of Soren's storage building was smoking. Cade. He was already turning, already running. She ran too. Fast, long legs. 9 years of this terrain. But Cade was faster, already at the storage building when she was 10 steps back. He tried the door, latched from inside, hit it once with his shoulder and went in and the smoke came out. She stood the door, held it open. Resisted everything that told her to go in. The ceiling was too low for her. She would be in the way, not the help. 12 seconds. 15. 20. She was counting. Absolutely counting. Cade Flint. If you are not out of that building in 30 seconds, I am coming in regardless. He came out at 23. Smokes. Smoke dark. Jacket burning at the left shoulder. Arms full of a 5-year-old girl who was coughing so hard, her whole body shook. Wrapped around his neck. Eyes shut. He walked out of the smoke and handed her to Mara, who took her with both hands without thinking. The girl was solid and small and real and coughing and alive. Behind them, Soren and Astrid came running from the house. Astrid made a sound that had no language in it, just feeling. She took the girl from Mara's arms and pressed her face against the child's hair. Cade had dropped to one knee, jacket off. The left sleeve burned away, the skin beneath red and blistered. He was breathing the deliberate way of someone who has breathed smoke and is being careful about it. Soren crossed to him and put his hand on his shoulder. The right one. The unburned one. He did not say anything. Did not need to. Tobias Wren was standing at the edge of the light, still holding his ruined hat, looking at Cade on one knee in the dirt. He sat down on the ground next to Cade Flint, just sat down. Like he had run out of the energy to stand. I'm sorry, he said, rough. Like the words had edges. I didn't know. It would. I didn't think. Cade looked at him. Let the silence do what it was going to do. I know, he said finally. That was all. Tobias put his hands over his face. Mara stood in the emberlight and looked at all of it. Mara stood in the emberlight, the child of it. The old couple, and the young man who had come with torches, and the mountain man with the burned shoulder, and thought about the difference between people who burned things down and people who ran into the burning. Pretty clear which kind was which. The morning after the fire came up cold and gray. Cade's shoulder was bandaged. She had insisted, and he had let her, which told her the burn was worse than he was acknowledging. He sat at the kitchen table with his coffee while she changed the dressing. You're going to rest today, she said. There's fence on the east. Today, she said. Rest, he looked at her. She looked back. He looked at his coffee. She took that as agreement. Tobias Wren came at 8. Hat in hand. Burned hat. He still had it. She noticed that. He was not a man who threw things away, even ruined ones. "I want to help," he said. "With the ranch. With whatever you need. I know what I did. I know what I was part of. I'm not asking you to forget it," he swallowed. "I'm asking for the chance to do something different. Do you know anything about fencing? I can learn. East pasture. Ask Cade what needs doing tomorrow." He started to turn to Tobias. He stopped. "Whatever Cross promised you, it won't happen. Men like Cross don't pay their debts to people like you. They use them and find someone new." He stood with his back to her for a long moment. "I know that," he said quietly. "I think I knew it before." He walked to the barn. 3 days later, Sheriff Aldous Briggs arrested Cade Flint. The paperwork was 3 pages. Cade Flint charged with inciting violence, destruction of property, threatening citizens in the course of their lawful activities. Signed by witnesses she did not know. Cross's men, she was certain. Briggs stood in the yard with the discomfort of a man doing something he was ashamed of. Hat in his hands. "Not meeting her eyes, Aldous," she said. "You know this is false." His jaw moved. "You were in the square that day. 3 weeks ago. When Cade pulled his horse off the road because your Nora was riding past and her horse shied at a snake. You watched him do it. You know what kind of man he is." 3 witnesses, he said. "Low. I can't. You can." "You're choosing not to." Cade came out of the barn. He had read the situation in the time it took him to cross 20 feet. He read Briggs. He read the papers. He read the quality of the morning air. "Aldous," he said. Briggs looked at him with the expression of a man who is very tired. "Don't make this harder." Cade held out his hands. Every part of Mara wanted to step between them. She did not, because she had 7 weeks left. Thomas's notebook. A case that needed a living sheriff and a circuit judge. If she made this a standoff today, she lost all of those. Cade did not look at her as Briggs led him to the horse. He did look back once, from the road. A long look, steady and calm. Then, they went down the road and the dust closed behind them. And she stood in the yard alone with the papers in the morning, and the cold fury of a woman who had been very patient for a very long time. She went inside, put Thomas's notebook on the table, pressed her hands flat on either side of it, not panic. Setbacks were not walls. Setbacks were things you found a way around. What did she have? The notebook, the forged agreement, the survey stakes, the aquifer information, Soren and Astrid, Tobias, who had crossed from the wrong side to the right one, and Briggs who had not met her eyes, who had Nora who liked to ride on Thursday afternoons on the road past the Voss Ranch, who had a 9-year-old daughter and had watched Cade pull a horse off that road to keep her safe. She picked up the notebook and went to find Soren. That night she waited on the dark main street of Redstone Crossing until Briggs came out for his 10 o'clock walk. He saw her immediately. "You did not miss Mara Voss on a dark street. You're going to make this harder on yourself," he said. "Nora is going to want to ride again on Thursday," she said. "She always does. The road's clear now because Cade fixed the drainage ditch in August. He fixed it because it was a problem that needed fixing, not for Nora, not knowing about Nora. That's who he is, Aldous. I have 3 signatures. You have 3 men who work for the same man who forged my dead husband's name on a document." She held out the notebook. "This is what Thomas found, in his own handwriting, dated, with documentation. I'm not asking you to commit to anything tonight. I'm asking you to read it. Nora loves that road," she said. "I'd like it if there was someone good at the end of it." She held the notebook steady. Briggs reached out and took it. She walked away before he could change his mind. 2 nights later, she was awake at 2 in the morning when she heard boots on the porch, deliberate. Letting her hear them on purpose, she opened the door. Cade stood on the porch. No Briggs, no chains. A folded paper in his hand. "The cell door didn't latch right," he said. She stood back. He came in. She pointed to the hook where his coat usually hung. He hung it there. "Sleep," she said. "Not the barn, the room off the kitchen." The room she had been calling his in her own mind for the last week. He went to it. She stood in the kitchen alone for a while. Then she went to her own room, lay down. Outside the ranch was quiet. The horses, the wind, the owl, and under all of it, the particular weight of a house that held more than one person's breathing. For the first time in a long time, the dark felt like rest. The morning after Cade came back, Mara made 2 cups of coffee. She had been making 2 cups for 5 weeks. It had just become the shape of a morning without her deciding it. He was already at the paddock fence when she came out, his back to the house, his shoulders easy, the burned shoulder healing. The kind of man who healed without making it anyone else's business. He took his cup without turning around. They stood at the fence and drank their coffee and watched the horses and did not say anything for a long time. The gray mare, Thomas's horse, the one Mara had kept because she could not bring herself not to, pressed her nose to the fence post and blew out a long breath. "She likes you," Mara said. "She tolerates me." "There's a difference. She pressed her nose to your arm yesterday. She was checking if I had an apple, did you?" A pause. Yes. She had spent 3 years not trusting what she was made of. She was starting to trust it again. "What did the note say?" she asked. "The one Briggs gave you." Cade handed it over. She read it at the fence with the coffee still warm in her other hand. Briggs's small, careful handwriting, 2 lines. The ink on Thomas's signature. "Check the date the document was written against the date of signing. The aging is wrong." She read it twice. The paper told the truth if you knew how to read it. The document was dated 3 years ago. But the paper itself, the grain, the way it had taken the ink, was newer than that. A man who had spent 2 years in a law office learned to notice such things. Not science, just attention. The kind that came from reading 10,000 documents and knowing when Ron felt wrong. Briggs had recognized the forgery, had recognized it, and said nothing for 5 months. And then had not been able to keep saying nothing anymore. Briggs had already filed for a temporary stay with the circuit court. She did not know that yet. She would find out on Thursday. In a letter arriving with the morning mail, 3 words in his small, careful handwriting. "Deadline is suspended. We need a witness who can speak to the ink," she said. "Someone Cross can't reach. The circuit judge comes through in 3 weeks. I'm going to talk to Tobias," she said. Tobias was in the east pasture. She walked out to him through the long morning shadow she cast. "I need to know what you know," she said. "About Cross. About what he told people. About what he promised you." He looked at the fence post, at the hole he was digging. "Cross promised my father a long-term smithy contract. The mine cut back orders. We were struggling." He paused. "Cross told me the mountain man was dangerous, that you had been deceived, that the decent thing was to help remove him, and you believed him. I wanted to believe him, because if I believed him it meant I was helping someone, not just solving my father's money problem by looking away," he swallowed. "I was wrong. I knew I was wrong when I was still on the horse, Tobias. Will you say this in front of people?" In front of Cross. At the community meeting in 2 weeks, he looked at the post hole. At the fence line he had built over the last 4 days, solid and straight. "He'll destroy my father's business," he said. He was never going to fulfill the contract. "Men like Cross don't pay their debts to people like you. They use them and find someone new." He heard it differently this time. "Yes," he said. Quiet, certain. "I'll say it." She started to go, "Mrs. Boss." She stopped. "Do you think Cade Flint would teach me things? About horses, about land reading. I've spent 22 years in this valley, and I don't actually know half of what it does. Ask him yourself. He'll say yes or he won't. But I suspect he will." She spent an afternoon with Soren, his large old hands steady on Thomas's notebook pages. He had known Thomas, recognized the handwriting. He had noticed the survey stakes himself last spring and wondered about them. "I will say what I know," he told her. Thomas was a good man. He deserves to have his name cleared. Astrid had come in from the kitchen with a plate of something warm and left it on the table without interrupting. That was love. That was the specific grammar of 40 years together. She spent another afternoon with a man named Everett Hale, retired regional land office clerk, 12 years of service, now living quietly on the western edge of town. The kind of man who sat in the back of every meeting and said nothing, but retained every document he had ever processed. He retained the original Voss property filing, the original survey from 1879, and very specifically, a notation he had made and been told to remove from the county records. 2 years ago by a representative of Harlan Cross. A notation referencing an aquifer assessment running under the Eastern Valley floor. He had kept a copy. Of course he had. "Will you come to the meeting?" she asked. He adjusted his spectacles. "I have been waiting for someone to ask the right questions for 2 years. "Yes, I'll come." Cade spent the 2 weeks working. The ranch was beginning to look like itself again. Not the ranch of Thomas's grand drawings, but the ranch as it actually was, solid, real. The fence lines running true, the barn roof doing its job. On a Sunday afternoon, she found him in the barn, rehanging the photograph that had fallen from its shelf during the fire smoke damage. Thomas and Mara on the day the deed transferred. He had found a new nail and was tapping it into the wood with the kind of care you gave to things that mattered. "Should go back where it was," he said. She came in, looked at it. Thomas's grin. Her trying not to, "Yes," she said. "It should." He hung it. Stepped back, looked at it. He was right. Cade said. About the land. He knew what this place was worth, not just money, what it was actually worth. She thought about telling him everything she was thinking. But the barn was full of afternoon light, and some things did not need language yet. "Come eat," she said. Astrid sent over a pie. His face changed. Just slightly. "What kind?" "Apple." Something that was almost definitely a smile. "Then I'm coming." The community meeting was the first Thursday of every month. Town Hall. 7 o'clock. Everyone at least theoretically had the right to speak. October. The air had gone cold, and the leaves on the oaks had turned the color of something valuable. The kind of evening that reminded you the year was going somewhere. That things were ending, and other things were about to begin. Mara drove the wagon. Cade sat beside her. Tobias Wren rode behind them on his own horse. Soren and Astrid came in their wagon, with Everett Hale in the back on account of his knees. The town hall was lit from inside. More wagons than usual. More horses. Word had gotten around the way word always got around in small towns. Imprecisely but thoroughly. Mara stepped down. She was taller than almost everything around her, which had been a fact, and sometimes an inconvenience, and occasionally a loneliness. Tonight it was useful. She could see through the window, cross third row. Not the front, too obvious. The third row was the row of a man who was present, but not showing his hand. Hat in his lap. Speaking to the man beside him in a way that looked casual and was not. She had expected him. She took a breath, let it out. Cade appeared beside her. She had not heard him come around the wagon. But there he was, ready? He said. She looked at the hall door. Thomas spent his last year building this case. I spent 3 years not knowing it existed. I think between the two of us we've been ready for a while. She walked to the door and opened it. The hall went through one of those waves of quiet that was not quite silence. The kind of shift that happened when something entered a room that changed the weather of it. She walked to the front. Cade sat beside her. Behind them, Soren and Astrid, Everett with his satchel. Tobias in the back, hat in hands back straight. Across the aisle in the third row, looked at Mara, then at Cade. His face did not change. His eyes did. The meeting opened with the usual small business. Road maintenance, a boundary dispute, someone's irrigation ditch. Mara waited. She had spent 3 years waiting for something that felt like forward. When the meeting chair, Howard Webb. A man who had learned long ago that being fair was the simplest way to be just. Asked if there was other business, Mara stood. The room shifted. There is, she said. She spoke for 11 minutes. Not because she was performing, because she wanted every word to carry weight and not a single one to be extra. She started with Thomas. The kind of man he was. Careful, honest. The kind of man who read every document twice before he signed it. She told them about the agreement she had found, the terms. The deadline. She told them about Thomas's notebook, what he had found, what he had spent his last year documenting. She set the notebook on the table at the front of the room, open to the first page. Thomas's handwriting visible. She set down Everett's copy of the removed notation, the aquifer assessment, the survey records. She looked at Cross. This document, bearing my husband's name, was signed after Thomas Voss died. The ink tells us so. The aging of the paper tells us so. She paused. Everett Hale. who spent 12 years as this county's land office clerk, can speak to the record removal. Soren Vane can speak to Thomas's concerns in his last year, and I can show you, line by line, what Thomas found and what he was building a case prove before he ran. Out of time, the room was very quiet. Cross stood, with the calm of a man who had stood in rooms like this before and won. I understand grief, he said, generously, measured. I understand that losing a husband leaves a woman. Mr. Cross, Howard Webb, not loud. Final. The woman is presenting evidence. You'll have your turn. Cross looked at Webb. Something moved across his face very briefly. He sat down. Everett Hale stood with the dignity of a man who had been waiting 2 years for the moment to cost him something. He spoke for 7 minutes, precise. The notation that had been ordered removed. The conversation with a man he had not named then, but would name now. Harlan Cross, the room did not erupt. But the quality of the air changed in a way Mara could feel. Soren spoke briefly, about Thomas, about the conversations they had in Thomas's last year, about what he had seen. Cross's attorney stood. This is a community meeting, not a court of law. The document has been properly authenticated. Filed by whom? Mara asked. By Mr. Crosseye's office. On behalf of a dead man, who had been dead for 3 weeks at the time of filing. The attorney sat down. Tobias Wren stood from the back of the room, cleared his throat. He was 22 years old, and this was the first time in his life he had stood up in front of everyone he knew and said something that was going to cost him. My name is Tobias Wren. My father is the blacksmith. Most of you know that. He looked at the middle distance. Mr. Cross came to me 4 months ago. He offered my father a smithy contract. In exchange, he wanted me available to help with certain situations. I helped with those situations. I was at the Voss Ranch the night of the fire. I didn't throw the torch, but I was there. I didn't stop it. Total silence. I'm saying this because what I watched that night changed what I was willing to be. And because the truth is, the truth whether it costs me something or not. He sat down, hands pressed flat on his knees, shaking slightly. Cross stood again. Webb let him. Fairness was fairness. He was still composed, remarkable given everything, and spoke with the ease of many years of practice. I understand that grief and hardship can make a person see patterns that are not there. The debt on this property is real. The document is real. I have only ever tried to offer a fair resolution. He looked at Mara. I think a reasonable woman would see the wisdom of accepting my offer rather than pursuing. I'm not interested in your offer, she said. He smiled. Mara, Mrs. Voss. The room heard it. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he turned and sat down. And Sheriff Aldous Briggs walked in. He had been standing outside. She had not known that. She had told him what was happening and left the rest to him. Because some decisions could not be made for someone else, he had made his. He walked down the center aisle with his hat in his hands, and the quality of a man walking towards something that was going to cost him, and had already accepted the cost. May I speak? Webb looked at the room. You may. Briggs stood for a moment. He looked at the document on the table. Then at Cross, I have been aware of certain irregularities in the county land records for approximately 5 months. He paused. I chose to manage those irregularities privately rather than publicly. I was wrong to do that. 3 nights ago, I reviewed the original document bearing Thomas Voss's signature. The ink on that signature shows inconsistencies with the age of the paper. Specifically, the signature ink shows characteristics of application within the last 6 months. Thomas Voss died 7 months ago. The document was filed 5 months ago. He set a folded paper on the table. That is my written assessment and request for a circuit court review. Cross stood, looking at Briggs, at Mara, at the room, calculating. He had been calculating for over a year and had been wrong about one thing. He had calculated that a widow with a failing ranch and no money and no allies would eventually have to accept his terms. He had not calculated Mara Voss correctly. He had not calculated who she would find, or who would find her. This will be contested, Cross said. His voice had lost just a fraction of its smoothness in a proper court of law. Not this, Harlan Cross, Briggs said. I'm placing you under arrest pending circuit court review of the land filing irregularities and the document forgery question. The room erupted. not violently. In the way rooms erupted when something long building finally broke the surface. She watched. Cross walked through the room with Briggs at his shoulder. He walked with his head up. He was not a man who would let them see him crumble publicly. She understood that, did not like him any better for it, but understood it. He passed her on the way to the door. He looked at her. She looked back. He did not say anything. She did not need him to. He walked out. Reverend Silas Cole, who had been sitting in the 5th row, stood up 30 seconds after Cross left and walked out through the side door without meeting anyone's eyes. The room watched him go. No one called him back. No one needed to. Howard Webb banged his gavel. Meeting is in recess. Subject to reconvene after the circuit judge's review. He looked at Mara. In 30 years of chairing meetings, he had never once been seen to be emotional, but his voice had something in it when he spoke to her. "I'm sorry it took this long." She nodded. She looked for Cade. He was where he usually was. Left shoulder. Slightly behind. He had not said a single word all evening. He had not needed to. She had needed to. It was her name, her land, her husband. She had stood up and said what needed to be said and let the truth do what truth did when you gave it enough space. He had just stood there. In exactly the right place. She walked to him. He fell into step beside her. They walked out of the hall together into the cold October night. Tobias Wren found her at the wagon. "Cross is going to pull the contract from my father," he said. "I know that." "Yes, the smithy work here. You have a forge that hasn't been used in a while." She had. Thomas had built it in the 3rd year. Had never gotten around to using it properly. "Cade needs a new blade on the fence post driver," she said. "And the pump bracket is cracked. Are you offering me work?" "I'm telling you what needs doing. The work part would be your decision." He looked at the burned hat in his hands. "I'll be here Monday." He walked to his horse. Soren came up beside her. Astrid on his arm. "Thomas would be pleased," Soren said. "Thomas would be smug," she said. "He would absolutely say he told me so." Soren laughed. It started quiet and went somewhere larger. Astrid pressed her hand briefly. "Come for dinner Sunday. Both of you." They drove away. 6 weeks and 3 days after the community meeting, the circuit judge completed his initial review. The aquifer findings were referred to the Territorial Land Office for assessment. The survey records were restored to the original Voss property lines, adding 200 yards along the eastern boundary. The document bearing Thomas Voss's signature was declared invalid pending full investigation. The deadline lapsed without effect. The Voss Ranch remained the Voss Ranch. She got the news on a Wednesday afternoon. A letter from the circuit court clerk. She read it at the kitchen table. Then she folded it and put it in the drawer, where she kept Thomas's notebook now. Not behind the hearthstone. In the drawer. Where things were kept that did not need to hide anymore. She went outside. Cade was on the barn roof. Of course he was. There was still work to do up there. He had said this cheerfully, which, coming from Cade, qualified as extremely cheerful. Cade, he looked down at her. She held up the letter. He climbed down the way he climbed everything, easily. Like heights were just another kind of ground. He took the letter, read it, handed it back. She watched his face. Not much. Not the kind of reaction another person might have. But she was getting better at reading him, and what she saw was something that settled. The way a thing held under tension releases. Just done. Quietly done. "It's over," she said. "This part," he said. She looked at him. "There's another part?" He looked at the ranch. At the fence line running true. At the barn roof. At the kitchen garden, which would need to be put to bed for winter this week. At the pasture. "There's always another part," he said. "That's what land is. It doesn't stop needing." Is that an argument for or against? Neither. It just is. You either want to do the work or you don't. She looked at the ranch. Her ranch. Thomas's ranch. Hers now, fully and legally and without argument. "I want to do the work," she said. "I know." And then neither of them said anything for a moment, because there was something else. There had been something else for a while. Something that lived in the space between 2 cups of coffee in the morning and the shared silence of a long evening. Something that had built itself quietly, the way the fence had built itself, and The garden had built itself in all the things that happened slowly because they were being done right. She was the one who said it. She was usually the one. He was better at silence. She was better at naming things. "What do you want?" she asked. He looked at her. "I mean, going forward," she said. "The legal situation is resolved. You could go wherever you wanted now, back to the high country. Somewhere new." She held his gaze. "What do you want, Cade Flint?" He was quiet, the real answer, kind of quiet. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled something out. She had seen him handling it before, over the weeks, working it between his fingers in idle moments. She had never asked about it. A climbing hook, iron, old. The metal worn smooth from years of hands and mountains, and the specific kind of life he had built for himself in the high country. Small, heavy for its size, the tool of a man who had spent 7 years going up. He held it out to her. She looked at it. Then at him. "Where I come from," he said. Low, careful, each word placed. "When a man finds somewhere worth staying." He puts down the climbing gear. She took the hook from his hand. It was warm from his pocket, from being carried for who knew how long. Years, maybe. The whole 7 years. She held it in both hands. And she understood. Not just the hook. Not just the staying. The whole of it. The man who had lost a place and built himself a life in the absence of one. Who had come down a mountain in chains and rebuilt her fence posts without being asked. Who had carried a child out of a burning building. Who had drunk 2 cups of coffee every morning for 6 weeks without once making it about himself. Who had stood in that town hall and not said a single word. Because she did not need him to say the words. She needed him to be there, and he was. She closed her hands around the hook. She looked up at him. He was taller than most men, but not as tall as her, which meant she was looking down slightly, which meant she could see his face clearly, every line of it, every year of it. "Then stay," she said. He breathed. "No more mountains," she said. "Not alone." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out, slowly, and put his hand over both of hers where they held the climbing hook. His hands were large, calloused, warm. "I haven't been a man who stayed," he said. "In a long time, I know," she said. Neither have I, she thought about Thomas. About 3 years of being the only person in her own life. About the specific courage of opening a door again, after you had learned what closing one felt like. We can be bad at it together until we're not. His hand tightened over hers. Not much enough. November came and went. The barn went up on a Saturday. Most of the town came. Not all. There would always be people who held the old views longer than any evidence could shift, who needed more time or never came around at all. That was people. That was how change moved in a community. Unevenly, with gaps and holdouts and the occasional complete reversal that surprised everyone, including the person reversing. You could not make it move faster than it moved. You could only be patient with it and keep showing it what was true. But most came. Soren organized the lumber. Astrid organized the food, which meant 3 long tables and enough cornbread to feed a small army, and 4 pies not to be touched until after the main frame was up. Those were the rules. Astrid's rules were not discussed. Soren said Thomas would have liked it. Mara said Thomas would have been smug about it, would have circulated among the workers, telling everyone he had known all along things would turn out this way. Soren laughed. It started quiet and went somewhere larger. Astrid pressed Mara's hand once, firm and quick. Briggs came late and stood at the edge of the gathering before Mara walked over, because she was not going to make him stand at the edge all day. "Thank you," she said. He looked uncomfortable. "I was late. You came." He looked at Cade, 20 feet away, directing 3 men on the placement of a center beam with the natural authority of someone who knew how things fit together. 3 men he had never met a month ago were following his directions without thinking about it, because the directions were right, and the rightness was apparent to anyone paying attention. "He's going to be all right," Briggs said carefully. "Here, I mean, he already is," she said. Something shifted in Briggs's face, not quite approval, more than tolerance. Something between them that had its own name she could not find but recognized when she saw it. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. A warrant from Cross's attorney, attempting a counterclaim on the land records from his cell. stamped and returned to sender. "Insufficient grounds. I thought you'd want to see that," Briggs said. "Thank you, Aldous." He nodded, went to get food, sat on a fence post and watched the barn go up with the expression of a man discovering, somewhat to his own surprise, that he was glad to be there. Tobias Wren came with his father. Eric Wren was a large, quiet man who looked exactly like what Tobias would look like in 30 years. He shook Cade's hand with the grip of a blacksmith, the grip of someone whose hands were tools, and sat down next to Cade at lunch. They talked about the forge on the Voss property for 20 minutes. Mara watched from a distance and did not interrupt. Some conversations found their own way. You only helped them by getting out of the way. The barn went up, better than what had been there before. An improvement that honored the original by exceeding it. The kind of thing that could only be built after the first version had shown what it needed to be. At the end of the day, when most people had gone, Soren found Mara at the paddock fence. He stood beside her. They watched the horses. "Thomas would have liked him," Soren said. "I know," she said. "Astrid said so also. About 7 weeks ago. I told her it was too soon to say, and she told me I was wrong. She was right, she usually is. Quiet for a moment. The comfortable quiet of a man who had been saying less than he'd do for 71 years, and had gotten very good at it. We are glad you did not sell, Mara." She looked at the ranch, at the fence lines running true, at the new barn, at the garden sleeping under its mulch and ready for spring, at the house that had stopped leaning east because Cade had reinforced the east foundation wall in the 3rd week without saying anything about it, and she had noticed 2 days later and not said anything for 2 more days, and then said, "Thank you," and he had said, "You're welcome," and that had been the whole transaction. "So am I," she said. Soren drove home with Astrid as the last light went off the ridge. The yard settled. Just Mara and Cade and the horses, and the particular quality of a late November afternoon that smelled of cold air and wood smoke, and turned earth, waiting for what came next. He came and stood beside her at the fence. She looked at the horses. "Not him good day," he said. "Yes, good barn. Better than the old one. Wasn't hard. Old one had bad bones," she smiled. Because he had used her word back at her, or Thomas's word, the word that had first made her believe something could be saved. Good bones. She had been turning it over for 2 months, discovering it was different from how it looked when she first heard it. She looked at him. He was watching the gray mare, who had her nose in the corner of the paddock, investigating something that was probably nothing with the thoroughness of a creature who has considered the matter and refuses to be persuaded by the absence of evidence. She found something again, Mara said. Same corner. Every time, there's nothing there. She disagrees. They watched the horse investigate with great personal conviction and ultimate in conclusion. Cade, he looked at her. "I want to plant something in spring," she said, "along the east fence." Thomas always meant to, but never got around to it. She looked at the fence line. New posts. Good solid rails that would stand for 20 years without complaint. Something that takes a long time to grow. Something you plant knowing you won't see the full result for years. He was quiet. "Fruit trees," he said. "Yes, they take 10 years before they really produce, I know." He was very still for a moment. 10 years. She had said it without flinching, without hedging, without adding anything to soften the commitment. She had said it to him, specifically to him, while standing at the fence of the ranch where he had said he was staying. She felt the moment he understood what she was actually saying. "Apple," he said. "And maybe cherry." "Apple would be practical," she agreed. "The cherry is for the birds. The birds need something. They do a lot of work around here." He nodded. "Seriously. Fair wages." She turned back to the horses. The gray mare had given up on the corner and was standing in the middle of the paddock, doing nothing in particular, with great contentment, which was how horses indicated that the matter had been fully investigated and was now closed. The sun finished going down, took its colors with it, left the sky that shade of deep that was not quite dark but getting there. The color of the day releasing its grip slowly. The first stars found themselves, tentative at first, then sure, the ranch around her, solid, real, the fence lines, the new barn, the garden sleeping under its mulch, the house that had stopped leaning east, Thomas in a photograph on the shelf in the barn. Not fading. Staying. The way people stayed when you kept living in the spirit of what had been true about both of you when you were together. Cade Flint at her left shoulder. Where he had been since the first day. She reached out. She was not built for half gestures or tentative movements toward things she was not certain of. When she reached for something, it was because she meant it, completely. The way she meant the ranch and the garden and the 10 years of apple trees and the cherry trees that were for the birds who did the work. Her hand found his in the dark, large hands, calloused. Warm from the day's work and the cold settling around them, he turned his palm up and held on. They stood like that until the stars were properly out, and the cold had settled, and the horses had found their places, and the ranch had made all the sounds it made when the day was done, and the dark was keeping everything. The kind of quiet that was not empty but full. Full of everything that had happened, and everything that was going to happen. Full of two people who had each built a life alone and discovered, slowly, that the life they had been building alone had been, without their knowing it, without their intending it, half of something larger. The gray mare made a sound. Low. Content. She approves, Mara said. She always approved, he said. She was just waiting to see if I'd figure out the important part. She looked at him. Did you? He looked back. Working on it, he said. She laughed. Real. Actual. The kind that came from somewhere deep, and had not been used enough lately, and knew it and was glad for the occasion. It went out into the cold November air, and the horses lifted their heads, and the stars continued their business overhead, and the ranch held them both the way a place held you, when it belonged to you. Or when you belonged to it. Thomas had always said those were the same thing. He had been right. He usually was spring-brought apple saplings. 6 of them. Cade had already dug the holes. She had not asked him to. He had done it the day before Soren arrived, measuring the spacing with the care of someone who understood that 10 years meant you had to get it right the first time. High because you would not want to undo it later. They planted all 4 of them together. Soren and Astrid on the east end, Mara and Cade on the west, moving along the fence line with their hands. In the cold spring earth, while the foal that nobody had planned for stood at the paddock fence, watching with the rapt attention of a creature absolutely convinced something important was happening. Mara pressed the earth around the last sapling. Firm, final. The kind of pressure that was not about force but about intention, saying, "You belong here. This is where you grow." She stood up. Cade was brushing dirt from his hands, looking at the row of small trees. 6 sticks, essentially. 6 small optimistic sticks that would not be much to look at for a couple of years, and would not be doing their full job for a decade. Planted in hope. Planted knowing. Planted by 2 people who had each spent years believing the future was too uncertain to plan for, and had now, together, decided otherwise. 10 years, she said. He looked at her. Give or take, he said. Thomas always said you don't plant a fruit tree for yourself. You plant it for whoever comes next. Cade looked at the 6 small sticks in the ground, at the new posts of the east fence, at the house with its east wall standing straight, at the foal at the paddock fence, still watching, still convinced something important was happening. Then he looked at her. Good, he said. And it was. It was exactly that. Good.